Welcome to the Gold Standard, of course, here from the 440 Sports Network, as well as Lower Broad Hockey as well. My name is Braden Gall, and you can get to me on twitter.com at Braden Gall.
I'm Emma Lingan, and you can get to me at Emma_Lingan.
And I'm Michael Gallagher. You can get to me at MG Sports _.
There you have it. Okay. I know the Twitter account just got attached, so if you'd like to go retweet it now, please go do that. If you're joining us on YouTube or on Facebook, please give us a thumbs up and a share. We do appreciate you guys. Lots of stuff to discuss as Steven Stamkos, Brady Skjei, Scott Wedgewood all introduced to the Nashville public in terms of their media availability. I know you guys have lots of thoughts on what was talked about, certainly setting expectations, line combinations, which I know a lot of folks have been talking about in the chat. Of course, the power play is a big deal as well. Long-term, a big deal for Brady Skjei, as he really wanted to be here. That was sort of a big part of his contract and his decision-making. And, of course, we've got some coaching updates and some Yaroslav Askarov updates. And, of course, y'all in the chat have lots of things to talk about. Line combinations seem to be one of the big things, but also a couple of other questions about Barry Trotz's plans. And we'll go right to that. Here's the thing. I want to say first and foremost, to everybody who has signed up and has subscribed and has become a part of Lower Broad Hockey. The response is great. You guys are awesome, and the chat is great. And Michael, great story about Stamkos up today. Emma's newsletter on Friday. We've got a video about Bally Sports and the TV future for the Preds that I did with Sports Business Journal reporter Alex Silverman. So a lot of really good stuff. We know it's sort of a slow time of the year. Things are going to ramp up in September. We've got lots of big plans for you. So I just want to say, I think from all of us, thank you to all of you who have signed up and have been a part of this so far. It's going to sort of grow slowly, but we've got some big plans for you. We're very excited about it. We think the content is going to be extraordinary, already extraordinary. Michael's stuff on great story on Matthew Wood. Go read that. Emma bringing the pithy banter in the newsletter each Friday. Very entertaining with her spin on all the national stuff that affects us. So make sure you make sure you subscribe and go check out what we're doing over there. And if you are a founding member, one of the things you get is moved right to the top of the line. I want to, you don't have to be a founding member to join. We do appreciate those who have. Shout out to Kevin, Chris, Jacob, Sherry, and Frank, all of you guys who have sort of like kickstarted this thing with your contributions. Every penny that goes into this is going to be put back into you guys to make it a better product. And again, we got some really cool stuff planned for you guys to build that community, which means, and I know this is Michael's favorite topic, but I've got to read Kevin's question because as a founding member, you go right to the top of the show, right to the beginning of the show. And I know you were tweeting about this with some other folks on the internets there, Michael. But Kevin says, I think we need some update on Yaroslav Askarov and if he has legit asked for a trade and how that affects Trotz's timeline strategy for moving him. So there's a lot layered in there. It's a very leading question, Kevin. But Michael, if you'd like to start, we'll go to you next, Emma. But Michael, if you'd like to start with that question from Kevin, which, by the way, thank you, Kevin, for supporting the community. But Mike, what you got for the good folks?
Yeah, it's the story that doesn't want to die. I can confirm as of Tuesday morning, Yaroslav Askarov has not asked for a trade. Whether that's changed in the last 48 hours, I don't know. But as of Tuesday, he has not formally requested. He hasn't gone Tyson Barrie and demanded to be traded. So I think a lot of this kind of started at the draft when Elliot Friedman said that all these teams were calling the Predators about Askarov's availability and all this stuff. And again, when you sign UC Saros to the mega extension you gave him, that's going to happen because you have him basically penciled in as your starter for the next 8-9 years. And that it's kind of, where does it leave Askarov? And then Askarov's agent, Dan Milstein, spoke to a Russian news outlet about a week ago and he didn't really drop any bombs or anything, but I think the point of doing that interview, he said, the quote was, Askarov has the potential and should be an elite goaltender in the NHL. Recently, we have been working together with the club under different scenarios. Yaroslav has proven himself that he's an NHL player. I don't know if I wouldn't go that far and say he's proven that he's an NHL player. I do think he's ready to be a backup in the NHL, like I've said previously. But he's still got a ways to go, and he's still in that development phase. And again, look, you're talking about a guy who is the greatest goalie prospect in the NHL right now, but has also lost the starter's crease in the playoffs the last 2 seasons. There's some things that he's got to work through from a developmental standpoint. But I think Milstein's point is he and Askarov both think he's ready for the NHL. And if Scott Wedgewood's here and that blocks Askarov for the next 2 years, then obviously their preference is to find a place where Askarov can go and at least get to where he's getting NHL minutes, because they both think that there's nothing left for him to prove in the AHL. And I agree to that to a certain extent. So I think they're working under different scenarios. I think that's Dan Milstein putting it out there that, hey, everyone knows Askarov is available, so if you want him, make your best offer to the Predators, because they're not just going to give him away. And I think that's kind of where we're at. He hasn't requested a trade. Again, that was as of Tuesday morning. But I wouldn't be surprised if he is traded at any point, because, like I said, if you have Saros locked up for 9 years, you have Wedgewood for 2 years, and if that's your plan, at least for the next 2 years, is to have those two guys as your starter and your backup, and Askarov gets a little impatient. We've seen a lot of guys, I don't think you have to worry about this, but we've seen a lot of guys recently leave the NHL, go to the KHL. I mean, Max Comtois signed a KHL deal this morning. Evgeny Kuznetsov is going there too. I mean, Igor Afanasyev, it's becoming a more viable option now. I'm not saying that they have to worry about that with Askarov, but I think they're getting to a point where players are trying to force teams' hands if they're not getting the playing time that they want. So I wouldn't be surprised if Askarov is dealt between now and when the season starts.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I think, when it comes to the agent's comments, you have to remember, like, the agent's job is to do what's best for the player. And what that translates to is to get the player the most money. And so he wants his client to get paid, probably being realistically, it's like, okay, if he's not going to have this path forward with the Predators, we understand. And we're working with the Predators to, again, we're not just going to give him away for nothing. So trying to hype up his value, and some of it is deserved. I mean, I would agree with Mike. He's proven himself as an NHL backup, I would say. But again, do you want to waste a first round pick as your backup? Probably not. That just seems like a waste of resources. So I think that it would make more sense to have him either, if the Predators are going to keep him in the AHL, where he can keep developing and keep actually logging those minutes. But if they're not going to keep him, then make sure that, his agent publicly hypes up his value and the Preds can get a good return for it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of just common sense involved in a lot of this. Like, you just can't, like Michael laid out the timelines and laid out where everybody's at on the roster. Okay, well, that's just a fact. The agent wants the 10% cut to be as big as possible. So the agent's doing what's in the best interest for the agent also. Yes, he does work for the client in this case. I'll push back on the one thing, and that is, like, you're not giving up a first-round pick for a backup, right? Like, you're giving up a first-round pick for the future, but you have to be a team that's in a position to be able to afford the time it takes for the future to come, right? Like, like, you can't just trade. Like, if a team is looking to win now and needs a goaltender to win now, that's not the guy. If you're trying to go get a guy to build your system up because you have an aging goaltender who might be done in 2 years, then that's the perfect guy to even if he's just a backup. He's completely worth the value. So
sounds to me like you just described New Jersey. I mean, Jacob Markstrom, I know that they just went out and acquired him, and he was someone that New Jersey was really gunning for at the trade deadline. But he's 34. Realistically, he's probably got 2 years left of being good, and then probably another year or two of being average or slightly above average. And I mean, you look at Askarov is what, 21? If I'm New Jersey and I'm sitting there and you have a playoff roster, last year was they were dealt a bad hand with everything that was going on, but they have everybody on that team. They have a playoff roster, and then you have a pretty good farm system now that's getting built up. I mean, they just got Anton Salayev, who I think was a steal at 10. He easily could have gone top 5 in the draft. You have a lot of pieces you can move out. I know, like Simon Nemec, they don't want to move him, but you have Dawson Mercer. You have a couple other guys. You have someone that if you parted with him for a player like Askarov, it's not going to hurt you long term. It'll hurt you short term because you're losing a good player right now, but if I'm New Jersey and I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, we have Markstrom, he's 34, about to be 35. It makes sense to go out and acquire someone like Askarov, who you can put in the AHL for a year, or you can have him back up I know they have Jake Allen. I'm just not a big believer in Jake Allen, but you could have him be a backup to Markstrom for a year or two and then take over when he's 23, 24. A trade like that makes a lot of sense for a team like New Jersey. There's a couple other teams out there that could make that trade as well.
Isn't Jake Allen also like 34?
Yeah, they're both almost in like mid-30s.
Yeah.
Emma, I know you talked with Gover on It's All Your Fault. Go check out that show about acquiring Patrick Laine. Lincoln says Columbus may make the most sense. They have a million top 10-ish drafted forwards and need a young goalie. How about Askarov for Patrick Laine straight up? You do it?
No.
I mean, with contract for them, of course.
Unless Columbus is retaining like 80% of that contract, no.
God, it makes them better right now, though, doesn't it?
It was such a Gover. Like, I love you, Gover, but it was such a Gover proposal, and it's now caught fire because the Hockey News Columbus has picked it up and presented it to their fans as like, "Hey, what do you guys think?" And of course, all the Columbus fans are like, "Yeah, absolutely." It's like, no, that's not going to happen.
I wonder who told the Hockey News about that podcast. I wonder. I could actually look. We're going to talk about this, and thank you, Kevin. Again, this is the priority of subscribers, but most importantly, you founding members. You guys go right to the top of the show. We're gonna address your comments and your questions right away. That is the priority you get when you subscribe like that. But I mean, if you're asking me right now, who helps this? Like, Steven Stamkos has raised Cup expectations. Barry Trotz has raised Cup expectations. No one should be hiding from the fact that they have all of these expectations. We've talked about it last week on the show. Glad you're both feeling better, by the way, and you're both better. You're both on the show. I am obviously this floating head in this dark room in Dallas, Texas at SEC Media Days. We'll be back all in Nashville at some point. But like, that's clearly what they're doing. If you told me I could have Patrick Laine for 2 years or Yaroslav Askarov for 2 years, and I'm paying $4 million for the combination of the they're a better hockey team. That makes them better and gives them a better chance to win. I'm not saying that they should do it. I'm not saying it's the right move. But
I'll push back on that because
they're better.
If you're trading Askarov for 2 years of Patrick Laine, you're basically wasting your first round pick. What was it, 21? The year they drafted Askarov. You're basically wasting that year's first round pick. You're getting 2 years of solid production from a player, but you're essentially he's probably not going to figure into the long term future of this team. And what concerns me about Patrick Laine is he's still in the player assistance program. You don't know where he's at mentally right now. You don't know what he's got going on. You don't know when he's going to play. Like, we all think he's going to be ready for the beginning of the season. We don't know that. He could still be in the player assistance program by then. You also don't know where he's at physically, whether he's injured. We don't know what's going on. He only played, 13, 14 games this season before he went into the player assistance program. There's too many question marks surrounding Patrick Laine for me to be okay with trading a player the caliber of Yaroslav Askarov for something that you don't know what you're going to get. Obviously, if you make that trade and Laine's fine and he hits and he's scoring 40 goals, it looks like a great trade. But if you trade for him and then he misses the first 3 months of the season because he's still working on his mental health, and then he comes back and he's rusty and he scores 5 goals and stuff, then that looks like a bad trade. And that, to me, that's too big of a gamble to take when you're trading someone like Askarov, who is the best goalie prospect in the NHL right now.
Okay. I could see Emma's face, like, I can already see it. So I'll let Emma talk here. That's no different than risking with trading for a first round pick. A first round pick there's no guarantee a first round pick is going to be good. There's no idea that a first round pick is going to contribute in 1 year or 3. And I'm not suggesting, and reports are that Laine is going to be cleared from the player assistant program fairly soon. But you're right; those are valid. Those are all valid questions. I'm just saying, if you have, hypothetically, if you have Patrick Laine for 2 seasons at a discounted rate, and you're giving up the piece that can't really play for you in 2 years anyway, your team is better. Your team is better. Emma, I know your face is like telling me, let's stop this conversation. but I
just my face, okay?
I mean, your brain and all the words you're about to say and everything else. But no, look, we can move on. But Kevin, founding member, wanted to ask about it. I think we can downplay the conversations that are happening or that it's not imminent, right? I think it's not imminent. That's fine. I think they're totally comfortable sitting in their situation. And look, injuries happen. Saros gets hurt. You need Wedgewood to start, Askarov to be second. Wedgewood gets hurt. Askarov needs to be number 2. Like it's great to have a backup plan and to allow him to marinate, as they say, in the AHL. So they're in a really great spot, and they don't have to do anything. But you're lying to yourself, not you two, like just anybody. If like Barry Trotz's job is to seek out every possible option and to explore every possible option. So I just think you're lying to yourself if you don't think that he is doing all of this talk and all of these conversations and accepting phone calls and going, yeah, I'll listen. And then, okay, I'll get back to you on that. You know, like it doesn't mean he's willing to accept anything. It doesn't mean he's actually close to a trade, but you're not doing your job if you don't know exactly what you can get for him from whom. And then what are those options? Is it a player? Is it a draft pick? Is it prospects? You know, whatever. Not that they need any more draft picks or prospects. But
Trotz absolutely is listening to teams that are calling. And I equate this situation kind of similar to however many years ago it was. I mean, clearly Shea Weber was the best player on the Nashville Predators. And David Poyle said when that Shea Weber for PK Subban trade came about, he wasn't thinking about trading Shea Weber. It wasn't anything that he was actively considering until Montreal came to him and said, hey, we want Shea Weber. How do you feel about PK Subban? That got David Poyle thinking. The wheels started turning. That trade ended up happening. Something like that. That's the kind of situation Trotz is in with Askarov. He doesn't want to trade him. I think ultimately long term, if Barry Trotz gets his way, in 2 or 3 years, Scott Wedgewood is not re-signed. Askarov is the backup. Saros is the starter. And similar to the Saros-Rene situation they had here a couple years ago. But I think if a team comes along and says, hey, we'll give you our best prospect plus a second-round pick, a high second-round pick next year, whoever that prospect is, if he's a good enough player and he could help the Predators, I think Trotz will consider that. But he's, like he said, he's got to be blown away. And all the reports have been saying that Trotz's asking price for Askarov is way too high right now. I think that's by design.
Yep. No, I agree.
I mean, it's like the same thing that was happening with UC Saros, right? Like he was listening to calls. It didn't mean that he had any intention of trading him. But again, you don't know what people are going to offer you until you dangle them out there. So, I mean, I think
sick dangle. It was a sick dangle by Barry Trotz.
It's shrewd. It's very shrewd.
Shrewd. I've never heard the. I want Willie Donick to work a shrewd dangle into the play-by-play. That was a shrewd dangle by Gus Nyquist. All right. Okay. So thank you, Kevin, for the question. Again, founding member questions go right to the top. Okay. The news of the week, of course, Steven Stamkos, Brady Skjei, Scott Wedgewood, all here in town, being introduced to the Nashville media and public. And I think you guys both have spoken about this, tweeted about this, and we were talking about it, that sort of, you know, it's not that the expectations, and Adam and I talked about it last week on the show, like what are the expectations? It's not, in my opinion, and I'd love to start this conversation with your thoughts on this. My expectation in year one is you need to be a 2 seed or a 3 seed. You need to win a playoff series, and you need to be challenging for a division championship. Your power play needs to be in the top 10. You need to probably get over 100 points. Like, we can kind of put some actual numbers on it, but generally speaking, they need to win a playoff series and they need to challenge. I don't expect them to win a championship in year one. I don't think they're quite there yet, but I think saying it out loud, which is that, like, every player in the NHL is trying to win a championship, every team, every coach. Some are closer than others in reality, but I think it's refreshing, or at least just thanks for being honest. When these guys are like, yeah, we came here because we thought this team can win a championship. I think the more reasonable expectation is a 2 to 3 year window to go compete for a Stanley Cup championship. And then it does sort of like decline a little bit with some of the age of the players. But at the end of the day, to hear Steven Stamkos say, look, I came here because I think I can win. And you know, Brady Skjei kind of alluded to something similar. Like, it's not that big of a deal. It's not a huge story. It's what the fans and everybody else are expecting. But at the end of the day, it's nice to hear someone just say, yeah, that's the goal. We came here to win a championship, and that's our intent, and that's part of the reason we decided to come to Nashville.
I mean, I go back to last year when Ryan O'Reilly signed here, and it was kind of similar because, I think he was at first, you know, I think his quote was like, well, why can't we contend? Why can't we? And it was, you know, I liked that sort of maybe people thought it was a little lofty, a little optimistic, but I mean, it was a good attitude to have. And actually, this is the kind of insider info you get from a former team employee. But when O'Reilly came and did his first media availability in Nashville, the social media team had him do a little, selfie video to the fans, like, hey, it's Ryan O'Reilly, like, go Preds, whatever. And he did his video, and at the end he said, let's go win a cup. And they made him do it again with a different ending. They were like, oh, well, that's a little much there, buddy. Like, let's kind of redo it again. And I think he redid it with something like, let's get to work, or let's get after it, or something like that, just because it seemed like, I think from maybe like a PR or marketing perspective, it may have seemed a little too much like a promise, like, oh my God, now we've told the fans we're going to win a cup. And if we don't, everything's going to be terrible. And it's like, okay, but you need the fans to know that that's what you're trying to do. Like, you need to let them know that you're not okay with just sitting here in the middle forever. So I thought that was interesting. And
sources indicate Nashville Predators not trying to win cup.
Right. And it's like, and then Stamkos comes in, and I like that he said it, but I also like that he acknowledged, I think some people are afraid to say that. And it's like, yeah, this team was afraid to say that last year. And so I think that, again, like you said, every individual player and coach and whoever out there is playing because they want to win a Stanley Cup. And, like, there's no one out there who's like, yeah, I'm just here for the paycheck. But like, at the same time, I think it's, now that, again, and I've said this before, but with Trotz going out, making these signings, bringing in these guys who just get it, they get what it feels like to win a Stanley Cup. They get what it takes, and they've done it recently. That sends a message that, okay, we're accelerating this window, and we're trying to do this. Like you said, I wouldn't expect year one, but in the next 2 to 3 years, this is our goal.
Yeah, and I think no disrespect to Ryan O'Reilly. When O'Reilly says, let's go win a cup, okay, maybe. When Steven Stamkos says, we're going to go win a cup, that carries a little bit more weight because of the player that Steven Stamkos is. And I love that he said, he acknowledged, he's like, hey, I'm here because I want to win a cup. And he said, I think people are afraid to say it sometimes because it heightens expectations. But then he also said, kind of you have to manifest it if you want it to happen. And I think there's a difference between last year's team where you had guys like O'Reilly, like Schenn, who have won a cup. And now you have guys like Stamkos and Marchessault. There's a difference between the serial winners that Trotz acquired last year and the guys that he acquired this year. Last year's team, I think we all said, even after they made all their free agent signings and everything, they could possibly be a bubble team, maybe compete in the playoffs. Don't really see them winning. This year, the narrative around this team is a lot different. I still don't think they're a cup favorite, but I do agree with what Adam said last week, that I think you at least have to get to a conference final. Not saying you have to win it, but I think that's kind of the expectation year one, because basically you're working on a 4-year window. You signed Stamkos to a 4-year deal. You signed Marchessault. Brady Skjei is a little bit different because he got a 7-year deal. But Stamkos is 34, Marchessault is 33, Roman Jossi's 34, Forsberg's 30, 31 now. Nyquist is 34. Your core players that you're counting on to drive offense, they're pretty old right now. I think the Predators are the 3rd or 4th oldest team in the league right now, and that's relative because
second oldest.
Yeah.
Second oldest. Yeah,
and that's not saying everybody on the roster is 35 or anything, but they have an older core, and I think you basically have a 4-year window to go out and win a cup. You're probably not banking on the 4th year of Steven Stamkos' deal of him still being a 40-goal scorer at the age of 38 and still carrying this team. So I think a conference final, or at least getting close to a conference final in year one, competing for a cup in year 2 and 3 is probably a realistic goal. I don't know if it'll happen, but I think that's at least what everyone in the building is thinking right now, because you basically put yourself in this 4-year window of, this is what we have to go and win a cup. I think they have the pieces. They might not get close this year, but I think they can at least make a run to a conference final or be close to getting to a conference final this year. And then you add 1 or 2 pieces next year, and I think you have a contending team. And I like the moves of getting Stamkos and getting Skjei and going for it. And I like what they said. the fact that they're bold enough to say, hey, we saw the signings of what was going on in free agency, and that's why we came here. I mean, Marchessault even said before he signed, he heard Stamkos was coming to Nashville. He called him and talked to him. Once he found out Stamkos was on board, he was on board as well. So I think it's also good. Barry Trotz has talked about Nashville being a destination place for free agents. I think it's good that they're able to lure those guys here now under the pretenses of, like, not just because we're paying you the most, but this is a place you can come and you can win a cup.
First of all, just completely discounting Ryan O'Reilly's Stanley Cup championship and just like, oh, he's not a serial winner. Like, okay. No, I think...
I'm not discounting it, but I'm saying Stamkos' declaration of let's win a cup carries a lot more weight than Ryan O'Reilly's.
I totally disagree. I think Ryan O'Reilly can say it just as much as Steven Stamkos can. But here's what I would say. It also
he can, but people aren't going to believe him as much as Stamkos.
Why?
Because he's Steven freaking Stamkos. Have you seen his resume?
No, of course. But didn't Ryan O'Reilly win a Conn Smythe? like,
yes, but Steven Stamkos has scored 40 goals how many times? He's arguably the best power play specialist of his generation. Like, Steven Stamkos' resume, I love Ryan O'Reilly. Steven Stamkos' resume is way better than Ryan O'Reilly. So when a player like that says we're going to win a cup, as a fan, you're going to believe him more than if Ryan O'Reilly says, let's go win a cup.
Sure. I think you believe him more because the team is far better. I think it's the context around the team. No one expected the team to even make the playoffs last year.
If Steven Stamkos
hang on, Michael, hang on. Let me finish.
If Stamkos signed last year, the social media team is not going to make him redo his video if he ends it with let's go win a cup.
So first of all, I think the let's go win a cup thing means absolutely nothing because it's like just a way it's just how you talk. Like the fact that the team was like sensitive to that, I think is kind of funny. But like, it's just what you say. It's like, all right, go get them. You know, it's like how my 7-year-old softball team is like, go Purple Penguins. You know, it's just, to me, let's go win a cup is just like a thing. It doesn't actually mean anything. But I think they were sensitive to it. I agree with you. I think they were sensitive to it because the team wasn't that good. And the team didn't have that expectation. And the context around Ryan O'Reilly was we're just trying to fill some gaps for a year or two while the young players develop. And if we make the playoffs, great. That's why it didn't line up with what they're saying. And so I think real good hockey people know this, that Ryan O'Reilly is just as deserving of saying that kind of stuff. Steven Stamkos scores more goals and is a better player. There's no argument there. But I think the context around the team is why they were sensitive to that. And I understand that. I just also think Ryan O'Reilly was just saying like what every player says like before he goes to bed every night, you know? I could see every NHL player just being like, "Good night, honey, let's go win a cup." I could see that being the thing that they say every night before they go to bed. So, all right. How about did anything Brady Skjei, Scott Wedgewood, anything that before we finish sort of like the cup expectation conversation? Skjei talked a lot about the long-term commitment. We can get to that, but all of these guys feel, to your point, Michael, about Marchessault, it does, I think everybody's on the same page about expectations and being open about it. I think that puts pressure on themselves, but like these are high-level professionals that know how to handle pressure. I don't think it's that big of a deal, and I think it's refreshing to hear from all of them.
Yeah, I think what I liked hearing from Stamkos and with Skjei as well is they both made a point to talk about the power play, which, again, we talked about this ad nauseum on the show about how it could be better. And I like what Stamkos said. Like, he actually, I wrote this in my story on Lower Broad Hockey if you want to go read it. I like that he was kind of explaining and diagnosing what makes a good power play in his introductory press conference, basically. And he said, when I was in Tampa, I had the luxury of being in the same spot, and we kept that unit together pretty much all the time. And he talked about continuity, and that's something the Predators haven't had, particularly on the power play, because if they throw a power play unit out there, doesn't work, they may try it again, maybe one more time. By the fourth time, that power play unit, if it's not producing, they're changing it up. I mean, how many players were on the first power play unit last year? There was Tyson Barrie, Roman Josi were on the ice at one point at the same time. I mean, Tommy Novak, Cody Glass, Tomasino. There were so many people they tried out on that first power play unit, and nothing really stuck, which is why I think you saw a revolving door of players that were cycled through. I think having Stamkos on the top power play unit, and then once they figure out who he prefers to have with him on that unit, I think you will see that continuity that he was talking about. And I think that'll be great too, because you can also, if you have a really good power play one unit, that gives you the luxury of being able to figure out what works best on the second unit. And I also like what Skjei said, talk about how he's been getting more opportunities on the power play to produce and stuff like that. I think having someone like him, like Ryan McDonagh was a pretty good defenseman, but Brady Skjei adds more in terms of offense and in terms of what he can do on the power play as well. So I think the fact that both of those guys addressed like, hey, we're pretty good at doing this one thing. This is something that's been a weakness of the Predators for the last couple of years. Like, we're here to improve that. Like, I really like that they were bold enough to address the power play, with basically call the power play out without calling the power play out.
Emma has nothing
Agree.
to add on the power play. Skjei also talked about
Agree.
Skjei talked about special teams on the penalty kill as well, I believe. And he knows he's behind Roman Josi, right? Like, I think that's interesting. I do think listening to them talk, Emma, it does feel like, to your point, Michael, that like it's clear what Barry Trotz was trying to improve. Like it's not just goal scoring with 240 goal guys. It is, and we've talked about this. We've got to go get the offense from the back end as well. Stamkos talked about this, right? Pushing pucks up in Andrew Burnett's system, pushing pucks up quickly to the forwards. But it's very clear that special teams were a major focus. And Brady Skjei talked about both of them, not just the power play, but the penalty kill as well.
Yeah, I think, and it goes back to what Trotz was saying about like wanting, these guys to have clearly defined roles. And I think that, no one's going to go out there and say like, well, I really only want to play on the penalty kill, and I would prefer if you didn't put me on the power play, please. So like, they're all going to have that team first attitude and be like, yeah, I'll play, I can do both. I can do whatever. But I think that if you look at just the facts with guys like Stamkos, Skjei, like clearly the former is an incredible power play specialist and the latter is a really solid penalty kill specialist. It's like that is sending the message that, okay, that's what we're going to do here. We're going to stop with this, platooning guys on both. I mean, like it's good to have if you need it, but like you don't want to need it. You want to have guys that are really, really effective in those specialized roles. So I think that, and even listening to Skjei talking about it, he was saying like, I can do both. I've done both. But like penalty kill is what I have spent, most of my career working on perfecting. And those are the kind of guys that you want kind of anchoring your special teams units if it's something that they have spent years specializing in. And not just, I mean, it's a good attitude to have, to be like, oh, I'll go out and do whatever you need. But like you need to kind of have that mindset, because with, again, going back to the earlier point, Stamkos talking about the power play said like one of the biggest, things about that, like that makes a good power play, is the continuity of it, and like having a unit that's always together and they just know where the other guys are going to be at all times, just because they have that chemistry and they have that rhythm together. And so, and I think that would apply for the penalty kill as well, but you need that continuity, and you don't get that if you have a revolving door of different guys out there playing on the power play or penalty kill every time.
And having Skjei on the PK too, it also helps take some of the pressure off Jeremy Lauzon and Alex Carrier to carry the PK, because outside of Ryan McDonagh last year, who played the most shorthanded minutes on the team, like Lauzon and Carrier were second and third in that category. And without McDonagh, you're probably looking at those two being out there for most of the PK situations, and that I feel like that would be asking them to do way too much, because they already were your second pairing. They went against some of the top lines. There was the Lauzon chasing the hit record. There was a lot of things that were going on with that pairing. And I think having someone like Skjei, who's comfortable playing on the PK and wants to do it, I think it's great, because now you don't have to force Lauzon. You don't have to force Carrier into doing something that they may be a little bit uncomfortable with too. And I also want to point out, we haven't really given him a lot of love, but Scott Wedgewood, I think, is going to be one of the top under the radar signings of this free agent period. There are a lot of scouts and executives out there who considered him the best backup goaltender on the free agent market. And the fact that the Predators went out and got him, I know everyone loves Kevin Lankinen. I do too. I do think Kevin Lankinen deserves a starting opportunity based off of what he's done. But if you look at head-to-head stats between Lankinen and Wedgewood, like the numbers actually kind of favor Wedgewood. He has a better record. He's allowed fewer goals against. He has more shutouts. He has a better goals against average, a better save percentage. His goals saved above expected is better than Lingan. So if you're going just based off of the pure eye test and pure stats, like Wedgewood was actually a little bit of an upgrade. And ESPN said the same thing. They went through based off of the value added, who had the best offseason and stuff, and they had the Predators ranked as the number 2 team in terms of value added, and they looked at goals above replacement, and they gave the Predators an actual plus 3.2 in goal. So there's a lot of numbers out there that point to the fact that Wedgewood is actually an upgrade over Lingan.
Yeah, I think what you want is to buy the backup goaltender before he becomes a candidate for starting goaltender, right? Like you want to buy Lingan as he's sort of trending into that starter. Then he ages out or prices out as a backup, so then he can go be a starter somewhere else. You kind of restart the clock with the guy who's trying to earn his way into a starting role, and that's where you save money. And I think at the price point, what, $1.5 million, right? I think they saved some money on this, and I think that I agree with you. I think they got better. Brady Skjei, I believe, one of 2 defensemen with a power play goal and a shorthanded goal last year, I think. So that's all you need to know. Guy plays on special teams. So and again, to both of your points, they don't have to say it out loud, but they are acknowledging they had major special teams problems by having this much conversation with their new pieces to solve this kind of problem. And again, that's common sense here. We kind of know all of that. I want to get to the playing center thing as well, and the lineup changes, because there's a lot of people in the chat at Lower Broad Hockey that want to break down what the line combinations are going to be. We've already had a couple of conversations about it. I have a feeling like up until April, we are still going to be having conversations about what the line combination should be for the Nashville Predators, unless they settle into something very quickly. They have a ton of great options, and we'll get to that. But the long-term deal, it seems like something Brady Skjei really wanted to address. And, hey, this is where my family wanted to be. We know sort of his we know the story with him and his family, and sort of how important it is that they're together. And then there's the no movement clause part of this. Like the whole deal, it feels like Nashville, not just for him, but for the family and for the long term, you kind of have to look at him and analyze him differently than you do the other guys who are a little bit older and kind of here to try to win right now. Skjei looks like he's a part of this thing for the long haul.
Yeah, I mean, Skjei is, again, like, I know people had issues with the term of Skjei's contract, but you don't get a defenseman of his caliber without that term. Like, if you don't offer him that, someone else will. And so it's like, maybe it's a little bit longer than you would want for a 30-year-old defenseman, but I mean, that's just the reality of where we are in this league right now, is like you need to offer that kind of term to be able to acquire players like that.
And from some of the conversations I've had with people over the last week or so, I feel like the sense is Skjei's contract will age a lot better than some of the other contracts. And I feel like there's a sense that Skjei will be in his prime for a lot longer than maybe some people realize. So if he's still playing at the level he is now at 30, at 35, which I think a lot of people think is possible, it's hard to argue if you're getting that kind of production out of a player who's that age. And I think, yeah, going 7 years, going $7 million per, that is a little bit risky, and that I understand the hesitation it gives fans, but also, right, you're only paying him $250,000 a year more than you were paying Ryan McDonagh. And I get Ryan McDonagh wasn't under contract for 7 years, but when you have someone like Brady Skjei who can play on the power play, who can play on the penalty kill, who can score goals, who can help drive offense from the blue line, when he does all these things really well, I feel like that's a player who's kind of earned a deal like that. And the fact that he wanted a 7-year deal, that shows that, like Barry Trotz said, don't come to Nashville to retire, come to win. That shows that he's committed to this team for the long haul, and you want players like that.
I also think the "hey, we love country music" thing is so cliche and overblown now when it comes to Nashville Predators free agent signings. It's like a mandatory question at press conferences, I guess. But I do think he's got a little bit more and it's because he plays with a little bit more flair, right? Really good skater, can score some goals. Like, he's got a great little snapshot from the high slot. But I did not know that he had been on Saturday Night Live with Chance the Rapper making fun of his last name. And I'm like, that's the kind of guy I want on the team. Like, that's an interesting guy with fun personality and like self-deprecation, and like, that's good. Like, how many NHL defensemen have been on Saturday Night Live? Like, I'm not saying it's a big deal and it means anything.
You had really never seen that before?
I had not seen that.
Even like people who don't watch hockey have seen that before.
I don't.
What rock are you living under?
I don't. I don't watch Saturday Night Live because it hasn't been good in like 20 years. And
I've never watched Saturday Night Live, and even I saw that.
I didn't know, guys. Just leave me alone. Stop shaming me. I just
this is the chicken debate all over again, huh?
What am I? Oh yeah. Let's not get started. Let's not get that started. So no, I just think it just packaged with his personality at the press conference and packaged with the way he plays and packaged. It's the kind of guy it's going to be interesting to cover. Fans are going to be interested to be around him and get to know his personality and his family and everything. And that just makes it easier to have fun if you're a fan of the team. So,
and as a reporter, that's something that we love. I will say, like, covering this team last year was fun because it was new, it was exciting. You didn't know what was going to happen. Are they a playoff team? Aren't they? Andrew Burnett, everything was new. But the one thing that I missed was Ryan Johansson's personality in the locker room. I feel like every locker room needs someone like that. That maybe they're not the class clown, but someone who has a lighthearted personality that can keep things breezy. And I got that kind of vibe from Skjei. So I think if he can bring that kind of lightheartedness to the locker room, like, it's good for them and it's also good for us because we enjoy interacting with players like that.
I also don't love social media algorithms either. Maybe that's where people see it. Patrick says, maybe I'm crazy. Probably. But the trade idea put forward on It's All Your Fault. What if instead of Line, they went after Trouba, which without including Askarov? That's an interesting one there. What do you guys think of that from Patrick?
With all due respect, Patrick, that is crazy.
Yeah.
I would not.
Mean, without Askarov too. Like, I don't know how that's okay.
Plus, Jacob Trouba doesn't want to leave New York because of the situation with his wife. So yeah. I believe Trouba has a 15 team no trade clause too. So, like, I mean, he can kind of control where he goes as well.
All right, I want to ask one question from Jeff here on the chat because I think we can. It's a quick little fun discussion about what the Preds could be doing in the future, and then we'll get to the playing center for Stamkos in the lineup because that, again, I think that conversation is like 9 months long potentially. We're in the first trimester of the lineup combination conversation. All right, Jeff on the chat says basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, but with all the prospects and picks that Trotz has acquired, a lot of we know how many picks he's got, we know how many prospects he's got. What do we think? Basically, there's two major strategies here. I think there's a third that we could discuss, but he asks specifically, Jeff does, about do we think Trotz is going to use all those assets to pull the trigger on a big acquisition, something that probably helps them try to go win a Stanley Cup immediately, or does he kind of hold firm? I would argue there's also a middle ground in there where you could tweak around the edges, add some pieces that would play on a third line, hypothetically, that wouldn't cost you too much, but would make you better. A lot of times we see teams acquire a piece at the trade deadline that's not a top line player, but he's like the glue grit guy that, like, is a veteran who knows how to win a cup. So your thoughts on just in general, and this is a very early conversation because the trade deadline is like 12 months away almost. What are your thoughts on sort of the strategy with all the assets that Barry Trotz has? Hold or use them to go get something big maybe at the deadline? Or does it depend on where they are in the standings at that time?
That's what I would say. It's the team. It's kind of like what he said last year, is that the team is going to dictate what I do at the trade deadline. And I think even though it's a different team now, I think that is still, going to be the strategy, as it should be, in my opinion.
Yeah, if they're in a playoff position, but the penalty kill is really lacking, or if they're in a playoff position, but you know what, the backup goaltender is just not cutting it, like whatever the reason is, I think you could potentially see a big trade to fill kind of a need like that. But I mean, the top six is crowded right now. You're not going to go out and get another top line scorer because where the hell are you going to put them? I mean, you're looking at probably keeping Forsberg, Nyquist, and O'Reilly together. Then you're looking at Stamkos and Marchessault on the second line with either Novak or Evangelista. You go out and you get another player, like that's going to push Novak or Evangelista down. I know people are saying, well, if it wins us a cup, who cares? And like, okay, touche, you got me there. But also, like, if you believe in Tommy Novak as being a number two center, like I don't see them going out and pulling off a trade for another big scorer like that. I don't think the deadline is really where we're going to see Trotz make a move like that. I do think he stockpiled the picks for a reason. If they go into next summer with 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, whatever, but they really just want to go and get someone to solidify the second center position because Tommy Novak just didn't cut it this year, and they think he's more of a third-line center. I could see them package some of those picks and maybe a prospect to go get a proven guy Who that is, I don't know. But I think if they do package the picks and the prospects to go and make a trade or whatever, I think it's more of a next summer move, not really a trade deadline move.
I would agree.
I think, and you guys have mentioned names like, Zegras, for example, whatever. You guys have mentioned names that are sort of like win now pieces that also help you kind of longer term, right? And I say, like, my thought is, if you're going to move your better assets, first round picks, second round picks, top level prospects, it better be for a top center that can either take the place of Ryan O'Reilly in a couple of years and can dominate in the second line right now, so that you really have like a true elite top six, which I think is already the best top six they've ever had, even with Novak and Evangelista in there. I don't have a problem with that. I think the more likely strategy is probably those, like, maybe one of the seconds and maybe some thirds, maybe a lower level prospect, to go add some like quality depth pieces to like shore up the entirety of the lineup. I could also see a blue line move as well to go get a higher level blue line player. We haven't talked a lot about that either. So I think it's more the middle ground. I don't think it's like do nothing and draft like 42 more players next year, because you already have so much. I think they have it. He has such an embarrassment of riches that I think acquiring something is the right move. The question is at what cost? And I think it's more like, hey, let's move 2/3 for like a third line winger who's going to also play every single role we need and maybe can fill an injury spot or something like that. But otherwise, if you're going to trade into your best assets, it needs to be for a center that can play number 2 center right now and for the next few years, and a guy that probably is the heir apparent to Ryan O'Reilly. It needs to be a longer term play if you're going to do that, in my opinion.
Yeah, they're going to want, they're not going to trade assets for assets, or they're not going to trade like assets for prospects. I think like Barry Trotz has made that clear that he wants hockey trades. Like he wants guys who are going to help the team now.
And Elliot Friedman even said at the draft, when they were talking about Askarov, the first thing he said was Trotz wants a good NHL roster player or like top of the top prospect. So I wouldn't rule out a trade for a top prospect, but it's got to be like a Macklin Celebrini type player. I'm not saying like he's involved in anything, but it has to be someone like that who can step right in either now or within the next year. But I do think Em is right. Like if Trotz is making trades, he's not trading Askarov for, I don't even know, for someone who's going to be in the AHL for the next 2 or 3 years. Like he wants someone who can step into the roster right now, and that makes sense. Like I don't even know like who would be on the radar, but if you're talking about centers, I could see them maybe like someone like I'm not saying like these are feasible, but someone like Mika Zibanejad, Tim Stützle, Dylan Larkin. Like you're talking about a player like that, adding someone of that caliber, not prospects.
I also think you could do like Fabro's in the last year of his deal. You could do like Fabro in a second and go get like an established blue liner that's closer to, Yossi and Skjei, and closer to like a true number 3 defenseman than either Lauzon or Carrier. So like I think you can do a lot of different things that are not super expensive, but still make the team better. And maybe it's a longer term play. I just don't think sitting with all of the assets and just getting a bunch more prospects next year is the right move. If you're trying to win now, like what's the point of having all that ammunition if you're not going to go for it? Especially when you have a loaded farm system like it is. And I do think you could still target another center, but I think it has to be someone that is a part of your plan for more than 2 years. It needs to be somebody who's part of your plan for like 4 or 5. Okay. Thank you, Jeff, for the question. We do appreciate it. Thank you to all you guys in the chat. Lots of great stuff. And a lot of the chat is also centered around, and we'll wrap up this way here. A lot of the chat is centered around line combinations. It's like it's like the catnip for all hockey fans. Oh, this guy plays with this guy, and this guy could play here, and this guy could play there. But we talked about it, and we've mentioned this specifically. Steven Stamkos talked about it specifically. The thing that is interesting to me personally is Evangelista, Stamkos, and Marchessault on the second line. Positionless hockey. Maybe the offense runs through the winger in Evangelista. Stamkos is still your net front scoring presence or just your shooter. And they can still kind of play some of their same roles. He's played center. He said he was open to it at the press conference. Is that the better line, Evangelista, Stamkos, Marchessault, or is it better with Novak as the center and the pivot and the 2 big free agent 40-goal scorers playing in their more natural spots on the outside? And what does that do then to the rest of the lineup, in y'all's opinion?
I think for me, I would prefer to put Stamkos at center and have Evangelista on that line over Novak. just because me personally, I'm not sold on Novak being the driver of offense. I'm not sold on Novak being the guy to put it this way. If Stamkos and Marchessault are both skating in, crashing the net, and someone like a Zadorov comes up and pressures Novak, gets in his face, I'm not sold that he has the ability to defend that play and make a play and get them the puck when needed. I would prefer to have Stamkos in that situation because he's proven he can do that. And I also think that Luke Evangelista has the higher upside as a playmaker, as a goal scorer. And we saw when he was put in a top 6 role at the end of the season into the playoffs, like he was taking 5-6 shots on goal. He was generating more scoring chances. He was getting better looks. I would prefer to go with the line combination that gives you the higher upside, the better potential to put the puck in the net to generate more points. And I think that's Evangelista, just because I worry about Novak's ability to make those plays, because the Vancouver Canucks gave a blueprint on how to defend Tommy Novak. And if more teams start playing him like that, I wonder if he's going to start, and maybe it kind of creeps into his head a little bit. I'm not want to jinx him or say anything bad about him or anything like that, but I don't worry about some of those things with Evangelista. And sure, you probably would like to have Stamkos out in the wing because it opens him up and gives him a little bit more freedom, but he said he's open to doing it. He played that position for so long. He said he's already taken a big number of face-offs the last couple of years, even though he's not playing center. So it's something that he's open to. It's something that he feels comfortable doing. And I just think the Stamkos, Marchessault, Evangelista line just gives you so much more potential to create chances, to put the puck in the net, than having Novak on that line.
Yeah, I would agree. I just, more from the perspective of, I don't like the idea of burying Evangelista on the third line, just because for the same reason. I think that we saw what he did when he was elevated into that larger role. He did start taking more shots. He started, becoming more of a driver of offense. And I think that, and we've talked about this before, that we need someone who can elevate Evangelista's game or help him elevate his game. And I don't think that, no disrespect, but I don't think Mark Jankowski and Colton Sissons are going to elevate Evangelista's game to its full potential. And so for that reason alone, whatever you can do to get him up to the second line, I would like to see that.
And there's been a lot of talk of like moving Gus Nyquist down, right, and breaking up the top line, and we kind of know the reasons behind doing that and not doing that. But I don't like, if Gus Nyquist is on the third line, that doesn't really maximize his talent or ability. And I just don't. I think it's easier for Evangelista to get, like, this is going to sound weird, but I mean it as a good thing. It's going to be easier for Evangelista to get lost on the second line by the defense when you've got Stamkos and Marchessault taking all of the defensive focus from the other team. And so that should create a ton of space for him. Again, we know what the center position does and how they're the ones that drive offense and they're the ones that are going the two-way. Like, we know all of that. It doesn't mean that you can't put into the system, especially with a system like Burnett's that wants to move things up quickly, where the guy with the most space is the one driving some of the offense. And the guy with the most space on that line is going to be Luke Evangelista. Like, there's no way defenses can focus on him if the other two guys are Stamkos and Marchessault. So I don't know if they've got a lot of options. I mean, otherwise, I don't, again, if you go get a center and then you have Evangelista and Novak on the third line, maybe that's allowing them to sort of develop at their own pace and then not a lot of pressure on that line to score a lot. I don't know, but I agree with my first thought when all these signings happened and haven't changed is Evangelista needs people to make him better because he's going to get better. And that is clearly with two guys that are, Stamkos is clearly a Hall of Famer. I don't know what you guys think about Marchessault, but we're talking about some of the best players in the world here. So I don't know. There's a lot of time to discuss this. I don't think, here's the other thing. If there was somebody on the line, like if Forsberg or Nyquist hypothetically was a Stamkos type of guy that played a lot of center in their background and like has a lot of that history, and like you could move them down to second line center, right? Like that would make sense, but I don't think that's either of those guys can do that. So maybe that's the only reason you'd break up the top line, but I don't see that type of player up there.
I just think with how well that top line played last year, it doesn't make sense to break it up. Even if adding Stamkos to the line gets you 5 to 10 more goals, I just don't see I mean, I put this in my story at Lower Broad Hockey this morning, but among lines that played 350 more minutes together, like the Forsberg, O'Reilly, Nyquist line, they were second in goals, expected goals for, shot attempts. They were 10th in goals per 60, shot attempts per 60, or 12th in expected goals per 60. Like, that line drove offense, and it didn't just drive off. Like, it was historically good for the Predators, but it was also one of the best lines in the NHL at creating offense. And you're talking about a lot of really good lines that were out there. I just don't see. To me, it's too much of a gamble to try and break that line up to figure out something that may or may not work. We already know that line works. I think keeping Marchessault and Stamkos on the second line, like Braden said, if you have 240 goal scorers out there, one of them a Hall of Famer, and you have Luke Evangelista, how much more open ice is he going to have because he has two players that are a threat to put the puck in the net regardless of where they are in the offensive zone? I think if you do that, Luke Evangelista could pop off for a 50, 60-point season because he's playing with players that are offensively gifted that will take away some of the pressure and some of the attention he will get, and it'll open up a lot more for him to create chances, for him to drive to the net. There's just so much more that Luke Evangelista can do with the puck on his stick than Tommy Novak can.
And I think back to your earlier point about the Forsberg, O'Reilly, Nyquist line, I agree. You can't, even with a Stamkos on your roster, I don't see Andrew Brunette breaking up that line until they give him a reason to. And so far, they have not given him a reason to. Not saying that it'll never change. I don't know. Maybe Gus Nyquist comes in and just has a really bad start to the season. I'm not manifesting that for him, but just, spitballing. If that happens, then it's like, okay, well, then maybe you put Stamkos on that line, move Nyquist down. But until they give him a reason to do that, it is not the responsible thing to do.
And it's every move has to be decided. Like, they all relate to each other, because what you're trying to do is maximize each player's value, like not in like an EA Sports like number value, but that kind of is what it is. Like Gus Nyquist on that line with O'Reilly and Forsberg, maybe he's like an 88. And then if you move him down to the third line, well, then he's like a 79. And then if you move him on the second line, maybe he's an 82. And so what you want is to maximize everyone's value so that like if you move Gus Nyquist down, you could be making two lines worse, right? Like there's a chance that, and that's not a knock on him at all. It's just sort of like kind of the facts of where the lines are at. And then honestly, what it does, and we'll do a whole much longer conversation about all this stuff because there's even more talk. We can have even more conversation about the third and fourth lines on this. But like, we don't really know which piece is going to earn its way onto the roster. We kind of all expect it to be Juuso Parssinen. Maybe it's Philip Tomasino. If Philip Tomasino is on a line with Novak and Evangelista, that's a pretty offensive, pretty skilled third line. Maybe that's something that Andrew Brunette thinks pushes his system more deeper down the roster. I don't know. We don't know what the bottom six are going to look like. We have an idea of a few of the spots, but I mean, we know Sissons and we know what it's going to look like, but they also have some options that aren't exactly set in stone on the bottom half, and who knows who develops down there. It doesn't look like a second line center is down there, but in a pinch with an injury, Colton Sissons is absolutely dependable. You could put Colton Sissons on the second line with Stamkos and Marchessault if there's an injury to somebody, and if that's your worst case scenario, there's a pretty good floor there, and there's a pretty dependable floor there for that second line. Not elite, but pretty solid. So I think that they're in a really good spot flexibility-wise on defense and on offense. They're in a really good spot flexibility-wise in net. And the power play, they've addressed special teams with these signings. Expectations are high. It's all good. It's all good. You want to know why? It's July. Everything changes in September and October and November when you actually have to start playing games. So, all right, Emma, thank you guys all for listening and hanging out. Of course, Emma, where can the good people find you? What do you got for the folks over at Hockey News and at Lower Broad? What's going on with you, and where can people read and find all your stuff?
You can find me on social media at Emma_Lingan, and over at the Hockey News, got some more stuff coming about the new guys, about Stamkos on the power play, about Scott Wedgewood, and we touched on it a little bit today, but about, his really healthy perspective to the backup goaltender position and what he can bring to that role, and how I think he's going to be a really important piece for this team moving forward. That'll all be over at the Hockey News. And then at Lower Broad Hockey, you can find me every Friday with what did you say? The pithy banter about
Yeah, I think it's good. It's very good. It's very good.
the pithy banter about other happenings in the NHL this week. We'll talk about Evgeny Kuznetsov heading back to the KHL, among other things. So make sure you subscribe so you can check that out.
Yeah, interesting theory. Interesting there from Michael saying a KHL having a little moment here. It's interesting. I will say, Emma, like, should I change? Like, do you want me to change the picture or not? Like, that's what we're here for.
It's fine. I've owned it. I just let it be known that I do not habitually consume beer through a straw or a crazy straw specifically. It's a mimosa in a beer stein. And I just need people to know that, because for whatever reason, people have fixated on that picture of me and just giving me so much shit for drinking beer with a straw, which, by the way, again, it's not beer, but even if it was, let me live my life. It's not hurting you or me.
Can we Photoshop her coffee cup over the beer stein there?
Okay,
my giant coffee cup.
I'm not sure drinking mimosas or coffee out of a bendy straw is any less of a sociopathic tendency than drinking beer out of a straw, but it is beer. Okay. Beer is the worst. Beer is the worst. Like, drinking, and I agree with you. Like, people need to know that's not beer. But drinking beer out of a straw that's psycho killer behavior. You know what I mean? Like, that's serial killer stuff. So and you don't strike me as one of those.
Oh, thank you. High praise. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I set the bar real high on folks. It's sort of like eating cheese pizza as an adult. There's certain things that I just kind of feel like, okay, there's boneless wings. That's another one.
All right.
Michael, where Michael can all the great folks find, read, and follow all of your thoughts, tweets, opinions, and articles?
You can follow me on Twitter at mgsports_. You can read all of my Pred stuff at Lower Broad Hockey. Just in the last week or two, I have a pretty good feature story up about Matthew Wood and kind of where he's at in his development, and kind of setting the bar for expectations for Ozzy Weisblatt. The Steven Stamkos story today. Friday morning, we'll have a story up kind of breaking down how the Predators stack up compared to the rest of the Central Division, how they've improved, and kind of the offseason moves they've made. And then next week, I for those of you who don't know, I was out basically the last 2 weeks with the worst sinus infection of my life. Like, couldn't get out of bed, couldn't breathe. So I'm a little behind, but we will continue our series of Scouts Perspective. We have some good stuff coming on Joachim Kemmel, Yaroslav, words are hard today, Askarov, and Zachary Leroux. I also hopefully this will come to fruition at some point. I have a lot of draft analysis to go through, and I might have a pretty notable guest come on and break down the Predators draft class with me. So lots of good stuff coming.
I like that. And lots of stuff developing and coming at Lower Broad Hockey. So please come on over there and subscribe. It's been a really great response so far, and we can't wait for the season to get started. Lots of fun stuff planned for you guys. So we do appreciate all of you. If you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, please give us a share and a thumbs up. It really helps the product, helps people find us. If you're listening on the podcast app, also rate, review, and subscribe. Give us 5 stars, because if you do not give us 5 stars, you are a hater. I cannot wait to get back to Nashville, Tennessee. It is just as hot, but worse in Dallas, because it's Dallas and it's flat, and it's Dallas. So I can't wait to get back to Nashville and to my kids and to my bed and to my family and to my wife and all that great stuff. So otherwise, great to see you guys. It's good to have you back, and check them all out on the socials and over on all the different websites. You can find all the great folks watching and paying attention. So we do appreciate all you guys for listening and hanging out and all the comments. Thank you guys for listening. So we'll talk to you guys next week. Have a good one, everybody. Thank you.